16, following the approval by the European Medicines Agency. We are planning to issue a final declaration, hopefully of approval, either tomorrow or on Monday. So it's eminently approval with extension for 12 to 17, not yet concluded. A number of details need to be concluded by the team during the day of today, tomorrow, and we hope to close it by tomorrow. On LC16, we are on the final rounds of questions. As you might imagine, there's a number of issues with the vaccine that was developed a long time ago to suit adequate criteria in terms of the programmatic suitability. These issues have been dealt. I think we are now on the third round of questions on some of the technical issues, very close to conclude. I don't want to share numbers, but it's only a few questions still pending that we hope to solve during next week. Once those questions are solved, we will convene the technical advisory group. In principle, we have a date now scheduled for October 21st. So that's our first priority in terms of approval of the UL for the LC16. ACAM 2000, we have finalized the legal arrangements that will allow the company to submit data. And once the data is submitted, we'll take first the decision if the data is sufficient for UL or PQ. And during the approval, of course, we will have to consider the specific situation of ICAM 2000, some target populations, the conditions for deployment in the specific setting. So I cannot anticipate either a positive or negative opinion, and I cannot anticipate right now if it will be EUL or PQ. It will be driven by data. As you all know, there's a recommendation from SAGE on the use of this vaccine on a specific setting, and the full marketing authorization by the US FDA, for example, implies control of every single person that is administered the vaccine to understand if they are immunocompromised or not, and specifically if they are seropositive for HIV. So there's a number of barriers there for the use of that vaccine in the specific setting. We are long from taking a decision. On diagnostics, I can announce that is imminent. I think we are preparing to issue today a press release on the emergency use listing of the first diagnostic for Mpox, which will be Abbott. We are already on the second company that submitted in the evaluation. Both of them are abridged EUL procedures, and we are starting the evaluation for a third diagnostic, and this one will be a full EUL also. So during the next 2 weeks, I think that we will have more news on these two. Time of assessment for the Abbott diagnostic, for those of you that track these things, was 10 days. So this is what I can report for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gaspar and Dr. Restrepo, for update on where we are with tools for Mpox and Marburg. We have more questions coming. Let's go to Jamie Keaton from Associated Press. Jamie.
Thank you, Tarek. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. My question is also for Dr. Gaspar. You said from 12 to 17 on the listing for the Mpox. I assume you mean 12 to 17 years old. And could you please specify what you know about what percentage of children in DRC, because we know that children are the most affected, fall into that age category? Thanks.
Thank you very much. So maybe Dr. Gaspar, but we also have Dr. Michelle Yao, who is incident manager for Mpox. Dr. Gaspar, would you like to start?
On the epidemiology, I have to defer to my colleagues.
Okay, so Dr. Yao.
Tariq, if you want, I can talk.
Please go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Ana Maria, please go ahead.
Yes, to say that it is important to consider that the epidemiology changes according to the area. And we have two kinds of virus circulating in the DRC and in Africa in general now. One is the clade 1A that is linked to the endemic disease and mostly affects children. This comes from zoonotic transmission, from spillover events from communities, and the evidence suggests that there are multiple zoonotic events occurring now, and again affects mostly children, and now also some adults when some human-to-human transmission is established, but these networks of human-to-human transmission that are small. in these communities, the percentage of children in the population could be up to 40%. So, and if you go to 18 years of age, it could be 60% of the population who is below 18 years of age. And then we have the second clade 1b, that is more circulating in the kibbutz and spreading to other countries, as you have heard, in Burundi, Rwanda, Kenya, and Uganda. And this clade has different patterns of transmission. So there have been some of the networks of transmission in which the virus enters in community mostly through adults. But then once it's established in the communities, we have seen in the different areas that it affects children and adolescents and adults. Perhaps transmission from adults to children or from children to adults, that is work towards that. And regarding the population, it's the same. The majority of the population, about 50 to 60%, depending on the area, could be below the age of 18 and about 40% below the age of 12. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ana Maria. Dr. Mike Ryan would like to add something. Dr. Ryan?
Yes, and maybe just supplement on Maria, the SAGE have made recommendations potentially for the use of those vaccines in younger children. So again, off-label use is possible, but that would have to be approved by national authorities. But what Rogerio is talking about is a specific EUL as in a licensing process. So there are opportunities to be able to vaccinate children. I think it's very important that those opportunities are taken, and that the necessary processes are put in place to make that happen. I fully agree with Ana Maria's analysis of the epidemiologic situation. We're not dealing, Tedros has said this previously, we're not dealing with one event, we're dealing with many events. And the zoonotic component in clade 1A is very significant, and we need to gain a much better, quicker understanding of what's actually dynamically happening at the animal-human interface in that situation. Again, with Marburg and previous questions, there's a strong focus on vaccines as major countermeasures. I would argue and thank Rogerio and his team for the work they're doing on diagnostics for both, particularly in the mpox situation. Vaccination by itself, without the targeting of surveillance, is going to not have the impact that we want it to have. The primary intervention here is good surveillance, engage communities, helping communities to prevent transmission from person to person. And Maria has outlined how that dynamic is happening, or from animals to humans. This is the classic public health measures. Vaccines won't solve failures of surveillance. Vaccines won't solve failures in public health measures. Vaccines will supplement and make those interventions more powerful. We need to be exceptionally careful here that this is not a vaccines issue. This is adding vaccine in a targeted way to an already functioning program of case detection, contact tracing, community engagement, empowering and investing in communities to prevent transmission from person to person, whatever the transmission is occurring, like whatever intimate contact is driving that. Vaccine introduced into that kind of program will have a doubling and tripling effect on effectiveness. In the case of Marburg, for example, vaccines have never been a solution in previous Marburg outbreaks. The Marburg has been, as Abdi has alluded to, essentially nosocomial events in the past. There is community transmission, but what we've seen is Marburg virus exploiting situations where there are failures of infection prevention and control, very often in sophisticated hospitals where there are multiple interventions in patients. So therefore, in the laudable act of trying to provide assistance, healthcare itself can become embroiled in the transmission chain. We saw that in Hong Kong during SARS-1. We saw that in Canada. We've seen that in COVID and other situations. This is not unusual. But what it does mean is that the major amplification events in Marburg are not occurring in the community, they're occurring within healthcare facilities. And that's why it's exceptionally important that the surveillance systems and the infection prevention and control systems within healthcare facilities in Rwanda are being beefed up, and we're very grateful for that. That's the major intervention. With regard to vaccines, there are candidate vaccines and have been candidate vaccines much further up the chain, up the research chain. And Ana Maria and her team and many colleagues in many institutions, including principal investigators in all the at-risk countries for Marburg, for Sudan virus disease and other diseases, have been working on master protocols for over a year, 2 years now, looking at establishing a mechanism where we can deploy investigational use vaccines in properly controlled, research conditions that will allow us both to deploy those vaccines for the assistance of people, but also, crucially, to gather the necessary clinical data that will allow those vaccines to advance in terms of their licensing. So we can avoid emergency use licensing in the future, that we can get licensed products available at an appropriate cost to all countries at risk of these rare but devastating diseases. And I would thank Anna Maria for the work that she has led with the R&D Blueprint for Epidemics and all of the partners out there. It's exceptionally important that we do collect that data. But again, vaccines are not required to stop Marburg. What's required is a strong public health program, which we have every confidence the government around will put in place, especially on infection prevention and control. And then we need to deploy vaccines in a way that we can collect the necessary information that will allow us to further advance their use in future epidemics. Over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan. And before we close this press briefing, let's just take the follow-up question from John Zaracostas. John.
Yes, thank you, Tariq. It actually concerns what Dr. Tedros mentioned about the emergency supplies that you were trying to get into Lebanon and had to be postponed because of security measures concerning the airport, whatever. Are you looking at alternative routes to get these emergency supplies in, either by sea or by land? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Abdel Nasir, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you very much. I think, first we are trying to address some of those shortcomings because the airport officially is not closed, but many of the international airlines have suspended the flights to Beirut. The only airline that's flying is the Middle East. And unfortunately, the Middle East doesn't have the cargo in planes to transport. And other, private charter flights, actually the challenge is the insurance as well as the security. So WHO is currently, of course, exploring all options, whether it's, negotiating with the friendly countries to facilitate, the transportation of those supplies from Dubai to Beirut, but also other options, whether it's through sea, but also through, by road, via, Jordan and Syria and other options. I think, we want to exhaust, the air option. If the air option transportation is not, viable, then I think we need to, resource for other options into that. But as of now, I think there are some, that's why the DG has appealed other countries to assist for air, transportation to facilitate those supplies, especially the life-saving supplies that we really need to maintain, the mass casualty management.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdel Nasir, and thanks to all of our experts who were online with us today and here in the room. Thanks also to all journalists who were following us and others as well on our social media platforms. With this, we will wish you a very nice end of the day and see you next time for our next press briefing.